right, so we are live on Zoom, and momentarily we will be live on Facebook, and we are going to get started in about 30 seconds. So as folks file on into the Zoom session, we will get started in about 15 seconds. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm the Community Outreach Librarian and Head of Technical Services at the Tewksbury Public Library. Very excited to be with you tonight on this rainy, dreary, gray evening. Thank you so much for joining us. For those who are already in the session, no obligation, no pressure, but let us know in the chat where you're watching from tonight. So if you feel comfortable doing so, let us know in the chat where you're joining us from tonight. It's always interesting to know who we're reaching tonight. And we will get started in about 10 seconds. Hudson, Chelmsford, Tewksbury, Quebec. Oh, well, I think that's the winner for furthest away. Tewksbury, Lowell, Tewksbury, Lakeville. There we go. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. I expect a few more folks for, well, no, your chat is working because we can see that. There we go. Boston, wonderful. All right, well, we will get started. I expect a few more folks to trickle in, but out of respect for those that came on time, we'll get going. Again, my name is Robert Hayes, Community Outreach Librarian at the Tewksbury Public Library. Tonight, I want to thank the Tewksbury Cultural Council for funding tonight's talk. And the Tewksbury Cultural Council is a local agency supported by the Massachusetts Cultural Council, a state agency. So we want to thank them for their grant funding of tonight's program. Before I get too far into things, a couple of logistical things. I do anticipate tonight's program lasting approximately 90 minutes. We're going to go the distance tonight. So John will take questions at the very end of his presentation. If you have questions for John, you can type them in to the Q&A. And we will get to them at the very end of the presentation. If you have comments for John, you can type them into the chat, and we will, again, we'll get to those at the very end of the presentation. We are in webinar mode tonight, so John and I cannot see you. We cannot hear you. We are recording. We're only recording my video and John's video and John's presentation. Your video, your face, anything like that, we will not capture any of that. So you are safe. Ruth, you have your hand raised. I'm not sure if that's a mistake or not, but again, I'm going to keep everyone muted. So if you have questions or comments, you type them into the Q&A or into the chat, and we'll get to those at the very end. Okay. You'll get an email from me tomorrow morning with a link to a feedback survey. Please take 30 seconds, fill that out. Let us know what you thought of tonight's event and what you'd like to see for future events from the Tewksbury Library. And rather than promote an upcoming program, I will provide information about this program in the email I send you tomorrow morning. On Tuesday, May 11th at 7 o'clock, we're hosting Master Beekeeper Frank Mortimer, AKA Frank the Bee Man, who will discuss his brand new book, Bee People and the Bugs They Love. And rather than sort of give you the spiel now, I'll provide information about that event in the email tomorrow morning. All right, so tonight's presentation is entitled Attracting Birds, Butterflies, Bees, and Other Beneficials. Naturalist and landscaper John Root will discuss how to create a nature sanctuary in your backyard by meeting the needs of beneficial wildlife for food, cover, and water. A variety of plants that nourish these organisms throughout their life cycles will be discussed, and organic methods for creating and maintaining a wildlife habitat will also be presented. Handouts will be downloadable. And I will include handouts in the email tomorrow morning, and comments and questions, as I mentioned, will be welcomed at the conclusion of the program. And a recording of this event will be scheduled for multiple broadcasts by Tewksbury Telemedia and will also be made accessible on their YouTube channel, I would imagine either late Friday afternoon or first thing Monday morning. And a little bit about John. So John is a certified organic landscaping professional. He has graduate studies in botany from the University of Maryland and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, go Tar Heels. Secondary science teacher certification, Bachelor of Arts in Biology, former science teacher, junior high level, presenter of gardening and nature interpretation programs throughout New England libraries, senior centers, long-term care centers, and other venues. Been doing this for 15 plus years now. Also the leader of an edible wild plants walk all throughout Massachusetts. Former member and chair of the Recycling and Refuse Management Committee in Amherst for over 10 years. And I could go on and on. So all of us here live on Zoom, let's give a big virtual round of applause to John for joining us here tonight. And John, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
And Robert, thank you so much. And thanks to the Tewksbury Public Library for hosting this event. Also to the Tewksbury Cultural Council for funding it. So here we go. We acknowledge that we live on land that was managed and inhabited before European colonization. Please take a moment to find your location on the map and honor those whose land we now occupy. I think this is a useful exercise just to touch base with the population of Native Americans who lived here prior to colonization and who had such an intimate association with the wildlife here, a knowledge of the wildlife and really a sacred relationship with wildlife, which I think we would do well to emulate. So what are beneficials? Well, beneficial organisms are those that help farmers and gardeners to grow the food and crops that we need. So we can refer to them as the 3 Ps: pollinators, predators, and parasites. Pollination is essential for genetic diversity. If it wasn't for pollination, every new generation of seeds would be identical, would be clones of the parents, and that wouldn't help. It would be difficult. It would be impossible then for them to adapt to new environmental realities or changes. And so the pollinators do not intentionally carry the pollen from one flower to the next. It just happens that they're tempted by the nectar and the pollen, and they accidentally carry that pollen to the from one flower to the next. Pollinators include bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. No bats are pollinators here in New England. Only in the Southwest will you find pollinating bats, but also moths, wasps, flies, and beetles are important pollinators. 80% of all plants need pollinators to set seed. The other 20% are wind pollinated. 1/3 of our food is pollinated, and pollinators make a difference. As you can see, the strawberry in the middle here didn't receive any pollen at all from a different flower. The one on the right was self-pollinated, but again did not, or rather also received pollen on the wind, which is interesting that that's even possible with a plant that is flower pollinated. But you see how important the open pollinated strawberry on the left, receiving pollen from the flower of a different plant, is so essential. So birds are considered beneficials on 2 counts. They are predators, the pest control, and they are also pollinators. The only 2 birds that I'm aware of are the ruby-throat hummingbird and the Baltimore oriole that are pollinators. But the other important role they play in the environment is dispersal of seeds. Bird populations have declined alarmingly since 1970 by almost 1/3, and 2/3 of our birds will be gone at the end of the century unless we are able to change our ways significantly. Everything here that we're talking about, impact on wildlife, is caused by humans, and hopefully because we caused it, we can solve it. It's not just the quantity of wildlife, the numbers of individuals, but it's also the biodiversity, the number of species. And you can see here that all vertebrates have an alarming level of number of species that are endangered. So when we think about bird conservation, first, let's do no harm. And one problem is that with large picture windows, especially, they look like the outdoors to birds. They see the reflections of the trees and their surroundings, and they just collide with them. And that kills about 1 billion birds in the US every year. So we can do something about that by making our windows more visible to birds. Visit abcbirds.org to learn more. And all these, the URLs, the websites that I'm offering here, you'll be able to see in the handout that I'll be providing at the end of the program, and Robert will be sending it to you in the email. Cats kill up to 3.7 billion birds in the US every year. That's both feral and house cats. So please leave your cats indoors. And in fact, you might be protecting your cat in the process. These are 4 examples of wild animals that can prey on or harm house cats. And also other cats and dogs that are abroad might be harmful to them. Now, habitat loss due to agriculture and residential and commercial development is a huge impact on bird populations and all wildlife species. And then climate change also is affecting wildlife in general, and birds in particular, due to habitat loss, due to new pests and diseases, the disruptions in timing of migration, reproduction, breeding, nesting, and hatching, and also bird behavior may no longer be in sync with their food sources and other habitat needs due to climate change. So one thing we can do for birds is just start buying less stuff. You can see with these in this pie chart here that food and non-food items are more than 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions, our carbon footprint. So if we use discretion in what we buy, thinking about whether we really need that, and also being aware of what the carbon consequence was to actually produce that item and also to dispose of it, perhaps that can make a difference. And it certainly is the rich nations that are causing most of the problem in terms of climate change and other environmental impacts. So bird watching is one way that we can disconnect from the commercial culture and become more in tune with nature. And massbird.org will show you all the different Massachusetts bird clubs. Some of them are offering programs virtually, and it's a fascinating way to learn more about birds. We all love birds. Everyone's really is a bird lover. Who wouldn't? Who doesn't just marvel at the ability of birds to fly and delight in their song, and we're all inspired by their devotion to each other and to their offspring. So birds need, just like any other wildlife, they need food, water, shelter, and places to rear their young. And please don't feed birds heavily processed foods such as baked goods that are that contain salt, sugar, refined flour, preservatives, and they don't have enough of what birds need, the protein and fat that they need for their metabolism. So this is the consequence of a bird that was fed too much processed baked goods, and this bird will never fly again. So approved foods for songbirds include eggshells, bananas, apples and raisins, hard cheese, peas and corn, oats, squash or pumpkin seeds, peanuts, other nuts, peanut butter. So here are some possible homemade bird feeders that you can make. Just go online, and there are a lot of do-it-yourself solutions to feeding birds. Or you can purchase one as well. If you have an open bird feeder like this, you will have to monitor it because birds will soil the feeder. And most of us don't want to be feeding the squirrels, at least not at our feeders. We might want to offer squirrels food elsewhere. So there are squirrel baffles that will prevent squirrels from accessing them. And in terms of placement of those feeders, it should be about 6 feet up. So if your metal pole is 8 feet long, bury it 2 feet down. And a metal pole is preferable because it's harder for predators to climb. And here's the 330 rule. It should be less than 3 feet from a window or more than 30 feet away. That's because it's hazardous between that distance of 3 and 30 feet away. The bird might be spooked by a predator such as a hawk and then slam into a window or into the building. So also, if that feeder is at least 12 feet away from vegetation, that will prevent a predator from lurking in that shrub or what have you, and be able to pounce on the birds when they're feeding. Perhaps a window feeder is the best arrangement there is because, for one thing, you get to see the birds up close. For another, they're usually out of reach of squirrels and predators. And finally, you'll notice if that feeder needs cleaning because you'll see it every day. It's fine to feed birds in the summer if you like. It's not harmful. Baltimore Orioles love oranges. Bluebirds eagerly consume mealworms, dead or alive. You can buy dead mealworms at the grocery store. And rose-breasted grosbeaks are one of the many birds that appreciate sunflower seeds and other feed in the summer at feeders. If you do decide to have a bird feeder, keep the seed dry by filling the feeders halfway. That will, and fill frequently to prevent the mold that will otherwise build up at the bottom of that feeder. And if you move the feeders around, that will prevent the seeds that fall from the ground becoming moldy on the right there and accumulating there in the same place. And if you clean your feeders regularly, wash them every 2 weeks, rinse and dry before refilling, that will also be helpful in terms of maintaining hygiene. You can make your own suet for birds. And really the only 2 ingredients you need are the suet or shortening and the cornmeal. But if you decide to add peanut butter, go ahead. And you would heat that together with the suet or shortening. And then once that's melted and mixed up, then you mix in with the other dry ingredients and place that mixture into a mold such as a can or an ice cube tray and freeze it for a couple of hours, and you're ready to go. Put the suet then in your suet feeder. Not recommended for outdoor temperatures above 50 degrees because suet, it does turn rancid in the hot weather. Bird baths don't need to be expensive. You can buy inexpensive models or even make one yourself out of materials that are at hand. A heated bird bath is much appreciated by birds. That element that keeps it from freezing, a heating element. Now, different birds require different kinds of bird boxes. So the dimensions will be different for different birds. For example, the box floor, the box height, the entrance diameter, and the placement, the height above the ground are different for these 8 different birds. And you'll find other, the bird boxes for these 8 and other birds at allbirds.com. And their basic bird box includes these features. There are 3 holes at the bottom for drainage. There are 3 holes at the top on each side for ventilation. Notice that there are hinges on the side so that you can inspect and clean the bird box. It's a good practice to have a metal pole. Again, the same reason why a metal pole is used for the feeder, to limit access by predators. If you place the bird box in the shade with a clear flight path and have that opening facing away from the prevailing wind, those are all good things to keep in mind. Now, starlings and house sparrows are invasive, non-native birds that were brought here and unfortunately have made themselves all too welcome. And they both do considerable harm to our native birds, not only displacing them, but also actually killing the eggs and the chicks. So these birds are not protected by the state. In fact, you're permitted to trap or harass them as you choose. Please don't put out colorful bird boxes. Those are too obvious to predators. They attract their attention. Also, a perch is totally unnecessary for a bird. They can just go right to the house, into the opening, but the perch actually might help the predator access those eggs or chicks. Also, you should have bird boxes totally made of wood, no other material, and they should not be dangling in the breeze like that. They should be fixed on a pole or on a tree or something. Protect your birdhouses from squirrels by putting that metal piece that will prevent them from chewing the hole and making it wider. And if you do put the birdhouse on a tree, especially, you're gonna need to make sure that the predators such as cats, birds, raccoons, squirrels, and others are not able to access it. This wire box is a great tactic, and so are these other methods that you see pictured here. And you will want to clean that birdhouse at the end of the summer with a 9-to-1 solution of water and bleach. Scrub it well. Think about having a roost box to offer shelter to birds during inclement weather in the winter. You can make one or purchase one. And you can offer bird nesting material either in a suet feeder or in a mesh bag in the spring when birds are fashioning their nests out of a variety of materials. People often, when they groom their cat or dog, they'll put that hair or animal fur out on a brush or branch, making it available for birds to use. Caterpillars are the best baby food for so many chicks because they have they're soft-bodied and they have all the nutrients that chicks need. This mama black-capped chickadee is going to need to find 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to fledge her young. So where is she going to find those? On native plants, not non-native plants. The reason for this, as Doug Tallamy explains, and he's a scientist and a real expert and very devoted crusader about this topic.
Hey, John, can I stop you for 1 second?
Yeah, yes, you can.
We hosted Doug on Tuesday night.
How about that?
He spoke about nature's best hope. He was excellent.
Great. Well, for those who saw him, you've already gotten a lot of this message. But so Doug explains that it's important to offer the native plants. Those are the plants that have leaves that the caterpillars are able to digest. The non-native plants, by contrast, our larvae or the caterpillars just haven't had the time, had the time in the evolutionary, thousands of years it takes for their digestive systems to figure out how to digest those leaves. Currently, we have about 70% non-native species in our landscapes and 30% native. We need to reverse those figures and have at least 70, if not more, 70% native species that we're offering, so those caterpillars can eat the leaves and the birds can eat the caterpillars. And nature's best hope is all about Doug's conviction that, well, we just won't be able to help wildlife recover if on publicly owned land like forest preserves and parks and that sort of thing. So we really need to do it on our private property. So much of our land is private property now. So he calls it our homegrown national park. He suggests that we shrink our lawns because lawns are a food desert. So if you think of the lawn as pathways between vegetation, that's ideal. Remove your invasive species, plant the keystone genera, he calls them the big 5 trees: birches, poplars, cherries and plums, oaks and willows are very important for those caterpillars. Be generous with your plantings, both the number of plants you put out and the diversity. Plant for specialist pollinators, and you can learn all about that in his books. Network with neighbors and let them know what you're doing, and see if you can help generate excitement about the homegrown national park. Some suggestions that Doug has: cover your well covers, because small critters will fall in and perish if you don't. Your window wells. Motion sensor lights are preferable to lights that are left on all the time. If you mow no lower than 3 inches, that allows flowers in the lawn to grow. And bubblers for birds are irresistible. Create pupation sites under trees. The reason for this is caterpillars will drop from the trees at the end of the summer, and if they drop on bare land or on grass, they're liable to be scooped up. But they need the leaf litter or ground covers or other natural vegetation to hide under for the winter. So especially under trees, try to have natural vegetation or just leaves. Don't spray or fertilize with synthetics, and educate your neighborhood civic association to make sure that at least that it's you won't be doing something that they consider to be illegal or not permitted. Ideally, you'll get your neighborhood civic association to be encouraging everyone to do likewise. So the best trees, vines, and shrubs to plant for birds. This starter list is offered by Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology website, allaboutbirds.org. And again, the oaks are one of those 5 keystone species. Mulberries, birds find them irresistible. I love them myself, so I can understand why. Sassafras has fruit that's appealing to birds. So does elderberry, another one of my favorite shrubs. For elderberry pancakes, count me in. All of the viburnums, people think too often that they assume that if they want to have beautiful ornamentals in their landscape, that's their priority, and it's probably the best way to do that is to buy non-natives. And I beg to differ. These are wild plants that are just as gorgeous as any you'll find. All of the viburnums have fruit that's appealing to birds. Maple leaf viburnum is a small shrub in the shade. Here's a tree, black haw. And then all the dogwoods too. Dogwoods might strip a gray dogwood bare of fruit when they're migrating in August and September. Here's a sensationally beautiful red osier dogwood. I call this an ornithomental. since ornithology is all about birds, why not give it credit? It's an ornithomental, red osier dogwood. White dogwood, another one that's a favorite with both birds and humans. You can get 10 free white dogwoods if you like by going to arborday.org, or 10 free American redbuds or river birches or any of these conifers, half dozen conifer species, or you can get one each of these 10 shade trees here. All you have to do is give them a donation of any amount and they will send you your trees. So a spice bush is a native shrub with fruit that is half fat, which is an excellent energy source for birds. And what bird wouldn't eagerly seek out blueberries? That's why people need to net them. And the Juneberry tree is a small tree that's native to our country that has fruit that's just as delicious as blueberries, in my opinion, and also I'm sure the birds agree. And it's a beautiful tree in all seasons. Another option, the hawthorn, a native tree that with both blossoms and fruits. Crabapple, black cherry, and choke cherry. Aronia, this is one of my favorite shrubs. Again, it's an ornithomental. People often aren't aware that it's edible. So in fact, it's medicinal and it's medicinal and it's good for insects, which is the entomology. So why not just call it an Eddie-Meddy ento-ornithomental? Black chokeberry is a native. Actually, Russians took this plant and improved it, and now we've taken advantage of their improvements and brought it back to our country. The Viking variety is best for fruit production and for size. So I don't like to call this a chokeberry. I prefer just calling it Aronia. But here we go. This is information that's practical about growing this shrub. And notice the height and the spread. It's always good to know before you put something in how much room it's going to need. And Missouri Botanical Garden is providing this kind of information on virtually every plant. So if you search for the plant common name or Latin name plus Missouri, you'll come to this page that gives you the dimensions of the plant, when it blooms and the description of the bloom, what are its needs for sun and water and maintenance and its use. You can see here it attracts birds, that has showing edible fruit, and it tolerates wet soil. The garden locations will tell you where to purchase that plant. So on with the show. Blackberries and raspberries are edible to birds. So is the staghorn sumac. These fruits are available even into the beginning of winter and right through the winter. Winterberry holly, stunning tree in the landscape during the winter, and northern bayberry also gives fruits in the winter for hungry birds, a welcome sight. And the conifers offer seeds that are edible for birds, also a habitat for shelter and nesting. And once again, as host plants, surprisingly, white pine is a host for 200 different species of caterpillars, of butterflies and moths. And then there's the eastern red cedar that also has edible fruit for birds. Now, if you pay attention, and if you're just learning about your landscape, you'll be realizing that there are different places called microhabitats that have different conditions. Some places are in shade more, while others have more hours of sunlight. You also might have differences in moisture and drainage. You'll also want to know about the soil texture on your landscape, whether it's sandy or clayey, or perhaps the happy medium, which is called loam. And all those features you can work with, except for the compaction. If you have compacted soil, no plant will grow there, and you'll have to do something to alleviate that compaction. As for the soil micronutrients and the fertility and the pH, these are things that you can learn in a soil test done by a soil testing laboratory. University of Massachusetts in Amherst has a soil laboratory. If you send a sample to them, and they will give you information about your soil. Once you've selected the tree or shrub that you want to plant and you've decided where to put it, dig an extra wide hole no deeper than necessary. The reason for this, the extra wide hole, is that roots generally grow laterally. They don't grow down nearly as much as they grow out. So if the hole is extra wide, that will make it easier for the roots to penetrate that already loosened soil. But you don't want the plant to be sinking down below the soil level. keeping the soil, keeping the stem or trunk above the soil is important for its to prevent disease. And if you keep the topsoil and subsoil in separate piles when you excavate that hole, then you can return the subsoil first and then the topsoil on top to fill the hole. Notice the mulching, as I mentioned earlier, it's good for the caterpillars when they drop down, and also it's also good for the plant because they're able to the competition provided by other vegetation, even the grass will offer some competition unless it's mulched. So mulching out to the drip line is a good idea. And also you can create a rim which serves as a bowl to receive the irrigation, to receive rainwater. And remember that for the first couple years of its life, you may need to water your sapling to make sure it gets what it needs in terms of its water for the when it's vulnerable to those hot summer days, and if there's been a long period of drought. And you might consider protecting your saplings. There's hungry critters, especially in the winter, that are looking for food sources, and they can find that in the bark of plants. Now, this is a continuation now of the allaboutbirds.org list of plants for birds. A vine called Virginia creeper, birds can eat that fruit, although humans cannot. And we can all eat grapes for sure. Here's another vine, the wild honeysuckle, which mockingbirds and catbirds appreciate. And then this beautiful ground cover called bearberry. And what bird would not eagerly seek out the seeds of the sunflower plant? But this is not the only plant that has edible seeds. You can see the family resemblance to sunflower in black-eyed Susan. In fact, in general, the other members of the family, the aster family or Asteraceae, the purple coneflower, and every plant on this slide except for sedum are all in that aster family, and they all have edible seeds for birds. So if you leave the seed stalk standing over winter, both for birds and for habitat for the insects, purple coneflower, black-eyed Susan, coreopsis, sunflower, gay feather, and the grasses, switchgrass, little blue stem are just some examples. So really, if you leave everything standing and do your cleanup in the spring rather than in the fall, it's good for wildlife. Leave the leaves, as I explained, it's a good refuge for the insects. And leave dead trees and snags. Birds can raise their young in these snags and also find insects to eat. And create brush piles. Birds find that the 3 S's there, sanctuary, shelter, and snacks. Sanctuary if they're being pursued by a bird, such as a bird of prey, or and shelter from the elements and little critters to eat inside those brush piles. So to review, the 4 things that birds need are food, water, shelter, and places to rear their young. And every one of these except water can be offered by the vegetation itself that you place on your property. So, and you establish. So gardening for wildlife connects us to nature, but unfortunately, too many of us, too many private residences are designed more for the kind of a formal approach and with no regard for whether wildlife's needs are being provided for. The lawn as a status symbol has its origins back about 4 centuries ago, when the aristocracy was able to demonstrate to everyone that they were so wealthy they didn't need to grow food on all of their land. In fact, they could have these lush carpets of grass and would hire people with scythes to cut them. And we don't cut lawns with our scythes anymore, but we still have the tradition of lawns, which are a food desert and a polluter and a resource guzzler. Far too many pesticides, actually much more than farmers use per acre, are used on lawns, and so much of our residential water also, because the grass that we have is really on life support. Kentucky bluegrass is not from Kentucky, it's from Eurasia. It's a non-native grass that needs watering during the hot summers. Where it comes from, there's plenty of moisture the wet summers, but not so here in the United States. You might consider establishing turf-type tall fescue in its place if you're concerned about the amount of resources that these lawns are demanding, because turf-type tall fescue has roots that go down about 4 feet, as much as 4 feet, and they need less fertilizer, less watering, less mowing, and they can grow in the shade or sun. But consider also that if you're having a hard time establishing lawn in different places, either due to shade or standing water or erosion, why not plant native perennials, shrubs, and trees? They know exactly what to do in those situations. And I invite you to check out Marianne Borges' website, thenaturalweb.org. She has fantastic photography and interesting articles about so many different topics. So environmental organizations are asking that we reduce our lawns by at least 25%. I think that's a realistic goal, and one that is good not only for wildlife and for our feelings of that we're doing the right thing, but also we will delight in seeing what happens, all the new vegetative growth that is a pleasure to our senses, and also how it brings in the wildlife, the birds and other beneficial organisms. Now, so natural landscaping is popular, is becoming more and more popular, but there's often people who are concerned about what its consequences might be. Well, it's not true that natural landscapes sustain rats, for example, and it's certainly good to be aware of Lyme disease causing ticks. And one way you can be ensured that you won't allow one of these to hitch a ride on you is simply to have setbacks or paths for walking so that you don't touch the vegetation as you pass. Ticks are not able to fly up and grab onto you. They actually have to just perch on the end of a blade of grass or a leaf or something, and then wait and hope that some animal or human passes by and they'll be able to grab on. For more information about preventing ticks in your yard, see limedisease.org. You can also buy one of these, a tick repellent with one of these 4 ingredients can often be quite effective. And perhaps the most effective thing out there to deal with ticks is to spray your clothing with permethrin at least 48 hours before use. It actually kills the ticks and other insects, mosquitoes, tigers, mites. It's non-toxic to humans, lasts through 6 washings, and factory treated clothing lasts through 70 washings, incredibly. Don't forget also that when you're providing for nature, nature can help out, and especially the amphibians, the frogs and toads, are effective predators of ticks. Mosquitoes are really more of a concern if your landscape is just lawn and nothing else, because puddles are more likely to establish in those situations. If you do have a pond, and that's great for wildlife if you do, keep in mind that mosquito larvae need stagnant water to grow to maturity. So if you have a solar activated pump, that will take care of them. You can also have fish that will consume them, koi, goldfish, or mosquito fish. And the bacterium BTI, it's called mosquito dunks or mosquito bits, is very effective at killing mosquito larvae as well. How about allergenic pollen? Well, it's the non-natives that are producing the most allergenic pollen. The public enemy #1 ragweed is not a native, and it's the wind-pollinated weed that it's good to try to control that if possible. Lamb's quarters, red root amaranth, English plantain, other wind-pollinated weeds, and some of the grasses as well. And a few trees also are allergenic. So, and perhaps one of the most important concerns are, well, won't it look messy? Won't it affect my property value if I have a natural landscape? And the answer, of course, is that if you have a well-planned landscape, it'll be absolutely beautiful, and who wouldn't want to be the next owner of that property? So one way to make a property beautiful and natural at the same time is the amassing one species, or perhaps just 1 or 2, makes quite an impact. If you cover the foundation with plantings, that's good for appearances, and having paths and things looking quite planned, which is the case in this photo. You can see it's designed to please the eye, and there's still a lot of nature happening there. One thing you don't want on your property is invasive plants. So you'll want to be able to recognize them and take an inventory of what invasive plants you have, make a realistic plan to eliminate or control them, and then follow through with that plan. One of the worst offenders is Japanese knotweed. It's impossible to get rid of it simply by digging them out, because any small piece of root that and it's unavoidably, the roots will will break off when you're digging. A small piece of root will simply produce more plants. However, it can be a good first step if you dig out the main roots, if your property is already well infested. And then at that point, you might either choose to continue cutting off just start cutting off every 3 or 4 weeks or so at the base, the shoots as they arise, or smother the entire area with heavy-duty black plastic. And it might be necessary to stomp on those plants as they try to come up. But that after 3 years or so, that will finally conquer the Japanese knotweed. It does take persistence. Oriental bittersweet is a terrible foe of trees. It'll actually girdle them and wind around the trees and can constrict them, so that if you have any of this vine that's actually heading for the canopy or already there, please lop it off at the base and at least kill that vine so that it can't produce more flowers and more seeds that are tempting to the birds. And uprooting when possible is the best approach. Autumn olive is one of the many shrubs that has just made itself far too welcome in our landscape. Another one is multiflora rose, just crowding out our native vegetation. And burning bush is no longer legal to be sold by nurseries. It's so invasive. Many of these plants that I'm talking about, in fact, were brought here by nurseries because of people's fascination with new plants that seem beautiful at the time, and they're not. Well, we didn't know what we were doing back then. So, goutweed, garlic mustard, black swallowwort, some herbaceous plants that you're going to want to be aware of. So, masslive.com will show you, I think, 31 different invasive plants to watch out for and how to deal with them. And migrating birds actually prefer the native fruits to the invasives. Blueberries, black cherries, black raspberries. When they're migrating, they will seek them out. Even when Japanese barberry, for example, Oriental bittersweet and multiflora rose might be far more common and abundant, but the birds will turn their beaks up at them and look for the native plants because they recognize that they are more nutritious. Poison ivy is actually a native vine. Those fruits are edible to birds and they're available in the middle of winter. But I understand if you want to eliminate it or control it on your property, and if you want to eliminate any vegetation, whether it's the lawn or poison ivy or weeds, you can simply smother it. This is the no dig method of transitioning from unwanted vegetation to your natural landscape. If this project seems a bit overwhelming, you can certainly do it in a manageable scale, just a small area for starters. And sheet mulching can be done any month of the year if there's no snow on the ground. So even in the middle of winter, if you just put down a layer of cardboard or 6 thicknesses of newspaper and then soak it well, and then putting the mulch on top of that. And eventually, of course, that barrier layer, the cardboard or newspaper, is going to decompose. But before it does so, it will have killed the vegetation below it. The photo in the lower right is called ramboard. You can order a roll of cardboard or ramboard if you have a large project that requires a lot of cardboard. Benefits of mulch includes suppressing the weeds, keeping the soil moist and cool, and enriching the soil. And if you're starting an annual bed, the traditional vegetable garden, beans and squash and cucumbers and tomatoes, etc., or the annual flowers, grass clippings and straw, shredded leaves, and pine straw or pine needles are all great for those annual beds. Incidentally, it's a myth that pine needles make the soil acidic. It's been demonstrated scientifically that that's not the case. So perennial beds, shredded leaves and pine straw can work well there too. Keep in mind, though, that shredded leaves will decompose faster, and so you'd have to replace them sooner. So pine bark, sawdust, wood chips, and chip branch wood are all alternative mulches for perennial beds. Please don't use dyed mulch. It's often contaminated with creosote and CCA, and that's bad for the plants. And don't overuse the mulch. If you mound it around trees, that tempts the tree to go ahead and grow roots and then into the mulch, which will then decompose, and those roots will become exposed, and that's not good for the tree at all. This is a rain garden here, and it demonstrates that eventually you won't need mulch. and the goal is to have wall-to-wall vegetation rather than a sea of mulch and every once in a while a plant. So the more vegetation, the better. And in this case, the rain garden is receiving water from the downspout. And you can see at the bottom of the picture, the path, the pebble path. If there's any excess water, it'll go down that way. But it's important for us. One of the reasons that natural vegetation is useful is the amount of water that it absorbs, and then it decreases the burden to our sewers. Well, one kind of ground cover is, or rather ground covers is a different kind of mulch. You can call it a living mulch that prevents weeds, retains moisture, and keeps the soil cool, just as other organic mulches do. Additionally, it holds the soil in place on slopes. Bearberry, I mentioned earlier, is a beautiful evergreen ground cover, one of my favorites. It grows in full sun. Thyme is wonderful for honeybees. Thyme oil is a good treatment for the varroa mites that are the pests of honeybee populations and hives. Three-leaf cinquefoil, a native ground cover, is this beautiful, and it's also evergreen. Gold stars, about to bloom later this spring. You get those beautiful yellow flowers. Wild ginger tolerates dense shade, and it is ginger. Bishop's hat, another shade-tolerant ground cover, beautiful leaves and intriguing flowers as well. Allegheny pachysandra is a native ground cover. I consider it to be more attractive than the Japanese pachysandra that is so pervasive and actually is fairly invasive as well. Barren strawberry, another great one, and this is already in bloom. And wild strawberry, a native ground cover. Well, on with the show with our beneficials. Hummingbirds are both predators and pollinators, so they're beneficial on those two counts. Hummingbirds are efficient predators of a number of different insects, and the only kind that you're likely to see here in New England is the ruby-throated hummingbird. We have about twice as many hummingbirds as we used to have, and that's a good thing. People really enjoy attracting them to their gardens, and I think that's really helped. So hummingbirds like moving water. They appreciate having the chance to rest on snags. And the holes that sapsuckers and woodpeckers make in dead trees attract insects, because insects are coming to feed on the sap. And then the ruby throat can help himself to those insects. Ruby-throated hummingbirds need spider silk to make their nests. The reason for this is that they lay their 2 eggs, and then when the eggs hatch and the chicks grow, that nest will actually expand thanks to the elasticity of the spider's silk. It's okay to rescue a hummingbird chick if it falls out of the nest, or any other chick for that matter. It's not true that the scent of the human will cause the bird to reject it. But avoid, if you know where nests are, don't come up and watch, because that will attract the attention of predators. Now, the best model of a hummingbird feeder is something like this that's easy to clean. You know, both halves, you can unscrew the 2 bowl-shaped halves and clean them separately. No need to buy food. You can simply mix water and sugar at a 4-to-1 ratio. No food coloring is necessary, and you shouldn't have any food coloring. Heat it to dissolve that sugar and refrigerate and use within 1 week. Replace the food in the feeder every few days, and clean it every 3 days. With hot tap water, you're going to use a bottle brush to scrub the sides. Don't use soap, because soap residue is harmful. If you find black mold, you're going to have to soak it in a solution of bleach, a 1:64 solution for 1 hour. So please be vigilant. If the nectar becomes cloudy, which will happen in the hot summer conditions, it has spoiled and needs to be replaced. This can happen in just 1 day, the fermentation of nectar. So I would rather offer flowers, which are never a problem in terms of fermentation. They always have fresh nectar and just the right combination of sugars, sucrose, glucose, and fructose. Also, the minerals and proteins and amino acids that are not present in sugar water. This vine, the trumpet creeper, is a very robust growing vine. Please don't grow it near your house. It's likely to cause some damage to different structures. However, out in a different part of your landscape, if you can offer this vine a place to grow, it's irresistible to hummingbirds and to a large number of them. Same is true for this vine, trumpet honeysuckle. Cardinal flower, as is well known, hummingbirds love the color red, and you can't get much redder than the cardinal flower. Cardinal flower does well in moist places, but also normal soil is fine. Wild columbine blooms in the spring, and so hummingbirds that have arrived on their migration can help themselves to this native plant and the nectar that it provides. Here's a butterfly weed. Hummingbirds can sample that nectar, as well as the anise, a very popular pollinator plant for hummingbirds and a vast number of species of pollinators. It's in the mint family. Another mint, the obedient plant, blazing star, swamp milkweed, foxglove beard tongue, and purple coneflower, and any phlox species are all visited by hummingbirds. So they don't restrict themselves to red, the color red. They find whatever they discover has a good source of pollen, and they'll rather nectar, and they'll help themselves. Now, the next beneficial organism that we'll talk about are bats. Bats are efficient predators. They eat nothing but insects. Little brown bat populations have declined by 90% due to a fungus infection called white nose syndrome, WNS. These two species, the little brown and the big brown, are the ones that we're most likely to find here in New England. And we can offer bat houses for bats that are clean and don't have disease. You can either make one or purchase one online. Mass.gov is a good resource to learn about bat houses, and the placement, ideal placement would be south facing under an eave of a house. It's not, you're not allowed to actually evict bats during the summer because they're feeding their pups then, they're raising their pups. So again, mass.gov would give you information about evicting bats safely and humanely. Please leave dead trees standing for bats as well as birds. Don't use pesticides. And again, keep your cats indoors, because if they find a bat roost there, they can wipe it out. Artificial lighting can distract and disturb bats in the nighttime. And now the lepidopterans, ever popular butterflies and moths are important pollinators. Butterflies are active during the day, moths at night. Moths are about 20 times as numerous as butterflies in our environment. Butterflies have club-tipped antennae, while moths have feather-shaped antennae. Butterflies make chrysalises, while moths spin cocoons. A study in Ohio showed a 33% population reduction over the past 20 years. Habitat loss, pesticides, and climate change are all to blame for this. And in fact, a couple of years ago, a study was done, and all the major newspapers were calling this the insect apocalypse. In a study in Germany demonstrated a 75% decline over 1/4 of a century of the biomass of flying insects that had been trapped and measured over that past 27 years. And these kinds of figures have also been seen for other areas of the world as well. So what can we do? Well, one thing we can do is appreciate just how important insects are. Often the attitude of well, let's get rid of them, right? Well, if we have no insects, we have a flowerless world with silent forests, a world of dung and old leaves and rotting carcasses, because they are responsible for decomposition. And because they're the bottom of the food chain, so many other plants, and also so important for pollinators, they're a very important part of our ecosystem. So butterflies are the most charismatic insects of all. So if we provide for butterflies' needs, we're bound to be providing for other important insects as well. Butterfly gardening conditions, the sun is good, at least 6 hours of sun is ideal. It's handy to have a water source nearby. Shelter from wind is helpful as well. And host plants are absolutely essential. We can't have butterflies unless we have caterpillars. Nectar producing plants throughout the growing season are important, and also using organic landscaping practices. So butterfly boxes are useless. No one has ever found a butterfly in a butterfly box. Spiders, yes. Wasps, yes. But no butterfly has ever been found. So don't waste your money. But mud is something that butterflies do use, because the males, actually it's called puddling, when they insert their proboscis into the mud and they get they're imbibing the minerals, which they use to make pheromones, a chemical that attracts the females to them. And when they mate, they're able to give those minerals to the female, which are passed on to the eggs to make them healthy. So we can use a bird bath for mud puddling station, using gravel or sand, adding salt or compost to make sure those salts are in that sand, and then keeping it moist. Or a simple saucer in the ground would also work. Butterflies love fruit, and they don't seem to mind if it's rotting. So you can offer them a plate and see who comes. And the host plants are so important. So here are the top 4 host plants for the either butterfly and moth or moth caterpillars. The goldenrod is a host for 125 different species at first place. Strawberry, 81 species. Sunflower, 58, and birdsfoot trefoil, 32. And there are many others that are important sources of edible leaves for caterpillars. But there's nothing like the trees and shrubs when it comes to host plants. The oaks, 473 species. Beech plum, cherry, and chokecherry, 411. Willows, 399. Birches, 393. So the spicebush swallowtail, if you're a spicebush swallowtail female and you got eggs to lay, you need to find a spicebush or a sassafras tree to lay them on, because those are the only 2 host plants of this intriguing and comical caterpillar, as well as the beautiful butterfly as an adult. Black swallowtails need plants in the dill or parsley family, which includes Queen Anne's lace, carrots, and fennel. Host plants for Baltimore checker spot are turtlehead and the common weeds plantain, broad-leaved and narrow-leaved plantain. Spring azure host plants include New Jersey tea, viburnums, meadowsweet, and dogwoods. And the great spangled fritillary and other fritillaries as well need violets, the common blue violet that is found in your lawn, which is a native plant. Monarch butterflies are the best known and the most loved butterflies here in New England, and they need milkweed of some kind. Common milkweed is the one that you're likely to find in fields growing wild, but I don't encourage you to grow common milkweed in your butterfly garden. It's just way too aggressive, and it'll take over that garden and make it very difficult for you to manage. And it's also difficult to eradicate because it spreads in subterranean runners. So it's preferable to use either swamp milkweed or butterfly weed in a butterfly garden in the sun, and in the shade, poke milkweed. Swamp milkweed, as the name implies, does fine in wet places, but normal soil is okay. Butterfly weed does fine in dry places, but again, a normal soil would be acceptable for butterfly weed as well, which is another species of milkweed. So those are the 2 species I'd recommend for your butterfly garden. Monarchwatch.org has been monitoring populations of monarchs, and they have taken a steep plunge due especially to glyphosate being applied to so many agricultural lands, which kills weeds, including milkweeds. So you can offer a way station for monarchs and proudly proclaim that you are offering this refuge for monarchs if you order a sign from the monarchwatch.org. And here is an example of a monarch way station. These 12 plants, edibleterrace.com is the source of this illustration. 2 of these 12 species, incidentally, are grasses. That these grasses provide habitat for a variety of insects underneath those clusters of grass. So notice also there are patches of one species of a given species of flower to make it easy for the butterfly to fly from one flower to the next. They don't have to travel long distances in search of the same species. According to Sharon Stichter, who offered this list of butterfly plants, here are the top 15 And this was published by North American Butterfly Association, which is a good website to learn about butterflies, naba.org. Now, the first one she lists is butterfly bush. She might have changed her mind, however, in the 10 years since she created this list, because it's now not only is this plant not a host plant for any moth or butterfly caterpillars, it's a non-native plant, but also it's clearly becoming invasive in New England. So we're better off to use native plants, and New Jersey tea is a fairly small shrub that's quite appealing to butterflies, and so is sweet pepperbush, Clethra alnifolia. The tall perennial compass plant, also called cup plant, because the leaves form a cup. When it rains, you can see how they hug the stem, and that rainwater will collect so that insects and birds can help themselves to that rain. Blazing star, beautiful flower for butterflies. Thistle can be fairly weedy, but butterflies love it. Asters, blooming in the fall, all different kinds of asters. The purple coneflower, very popular. Scabiosa, Joe pieweed, a tall perennial that grows in wet situations, but also in normal soil. Same can be said of boneset. And the milkweeds, again, not just as host plants, but also because of their flowers, offering such a great abundance of nectar to pollinators. Now, there are 3 annuals on this list: zinnia, Mexican sunflower, and marigolds. None of these are native plants, incidentally, but they do bring in the butterflies, and it's certainly okay to have a few non-natives here and there, as long as they're not invasive. But what you do want to be mindful of is you don't want to spend good money putting in plants and then noticing that they're gone the next day. So deer-resistant native plants, you can learn about them at the New England Wildflower Society, ipswichma.gov. Also Cornell Cooperative Extension. And if you're dealing with groundhogs or rabbits, here are 2 more links. Again, Cornell Cooperative Extension, or the Pennsylvania State University, psu.edu, for rabbits. Now, if you don't have much real estate for growing gardens, well, consider container gardens. Container gardening, you want pots that are as large as possible, because you won't have to water them as frequently. They don't dry out so readily. Consider how you can grow beautiful gardens in the strip between your sidewalk and your road if you have a situation like this. Susanna Lerman did some research in Springfield, Massachusetts on lawn mowing practices, and has demonstrated that if we mow our lawns every other week instead of every week, and no closer than 3 or 4 inches, that allows these beautiful flowers to grow and will provide for pollinators for butterflies and bees and others. So it's called a bee and butterfly lawn, a lazy lawnmower lawn, or a freedom lawn. And of course, it's important not to be using herbicides as well. Consider a wildflower meadow for attracting butterflies and other pollinators. I encourage you to do research about this. Extension.unh.edu. University of New Hampshire has some valuable information about the procedure. It's quite a project. The first year, you have to actually eliminate the vegetation, whether it's a lawn or weeds or what have you, where you're going to establish that meadow. And you do need at least 6 hours of sun. Incidentally, you don't need to have a wide expanse of land like this. 400 square feet is enough to establish a wildflower meadow. But and the methods for eliminating the vegetation you can learn about at that. It depends on how much land you have and you know, the costs that you have in mind in terms of establishment. Smothering is one possibility. Smothering with black plastic, or repeated tilling. Repetition is needed because there are seeds in this seed bank in the soil. So even when you get rid of the current vegetation, those seeds will sprout after that. So consider that there will be an upfront cost in creating a meadow, but eventually you'll be able to save on that investment because you won't have to continue mowing every couple of weeks. Mowing is only necessary once a year in the spring. And on with bees. the best pollinators because they have furry bodies. And the one that we see the most and are the most familiar with is the non-native honeybee. This bee was not here on North American shores until the British colonists brought them here 4 centuries ago. And native bees, however, were here, and there are some 400 species of native bees. While some people will recoil at such a sight, bees in general are harmless. It's really the honeybees and even honeybees are harmless in most cases, unless you threaten their colonies. But again, most native bees are harmless, and honeybees make honey, of course, and they pollinate a number of crops, so they're important to us and for agriculture. But if the honeybees became extinct tomorrow, it would have no impact on wildlife because they weren't here 400 years ago, and none of the plants need them. Bees and wasps are different because, and you can tell the difference. Wasps are much less hairy or fuzzy, and they have legs that dangle when they're flying. When people say they were bitten by a bee because they were walking on ground and suddenly got bitten, it's most likely that they were bitten by a yellow jacket, not a bee. Bumblebees are all native bees, and they're the other kind of bee that's most familiar to people. They carry pollen on their hind legs, just as honeybees do, and they also have colonies just like honeybees, but they start them fresh each year. They have to start them anew. So the female will find a suitable place to start the nest and lays her eggs, and has to provision those eggs and also provide for her own nutritional needs in the spring. So it's so important to have flowers available in the springtime that are blooming. So this is a mature, later in the year, a bumblebee colony. Bumblebees are experts at pollinating. This is a tomato flower, and tomato flowers and other members of the nightshade family, which include eggplants and peppers and potatoes, have unusual anthers that have, instead of the pollen being on the outside, the pollen is inside those anthers. So the bumblebee knows just what to do. It actually is able to vibrate that flower at just the right frequency, so that the pollen is deposited on its body. It's called buzz pollination. So growers of tomatoes provide boxes for bumblebee colonies. Raspberries, cranberries, blueberries, strawberries, and cucumbers are other bumblebee pollinated crops. Here's a native flower being pollinated by a bumblebee, a turtlehead. And we can think of plants actually striving to have brand loyalty with different pollinators, because it's in the plant's interest that the insect then, after visiting a flower, that it goes and finds another flower just like it. And so a flower like turtlehead is offering an ample reward of nectar, making it worth that while for that bumblebee to go all the way down and get that nectar at the base of the flower. Most other insects are incapable of visiting that flower. Bottle gentian is another one that only the bumblebee can access, because this flower never opens and only the bumblebee can force its way inside. We used to have an abundance of rusty patched bumblebees and American bumblebees. We don't have any more rusty patched in New England. It's endangered elsewhere, and we have much fewer American bumblebees. It's also a threatened species. The two that we are most likely to see in Massachusetts are the two-spotted bumblebee and the common eastern bumblebee. And you'll see in this graph, those two species have actually increased since 1971. But many other species have either declined or completely vanished due to climate change and loss of habitat, but also pests, pathogens, pesticides, poor nutrition, pollution, because pollinators smell the flowers, and pollution interferes with their ability to find them, and finally plants that are non-natives and invasives. are part of the problem as well. So, it was just recently learned in a study in England that some products that have inert ingredients which are trade secrets, so we can't. It's impossible for scientists to even know what they're studying. But they did notice that there were mortality rates even with Roundup no glyphosate because of the inert ingredients that were in that product. We should leave abandoned mouse and bird nests because they are good habitat for bumblebees. In fact, leave it be landscaping in general is good for wildlife. Bumblebee nesting boxes can be made or purchased online. There are some insects that mimic bumblebees as a survival tactic. Now, sweat bees are actually ground-dwelling native bees and are, and in fact, 70% of our native bees are ground-dwelling. It's a beautiful bee, that metallic colors, fairly small, attracted to perspiration, which is why it's called a sweat bee, but it's one of those native bees that's perfectly harmless to us. And they're generalists. They seem to be able to visit so many different flowers and help themselves to the pollen as a protein source. Another fascinating ground-dwelling bee is the plasterer bee. And you can see in the diagram here in the center of the slide that the female is actually able to line the cavity with something that resembles a plastic bag, and then laying its egg on the inside of that plastic bag and provisioning it with liquid food of pollen and nectar enables that insect to grow to maturity, protected inside that plastic bag. Then it chews its way out in the spring. So providing habitat for ground nesting bees can be done by an area of vegetation-free several yards across. Loose, well-drained soil, flat areas or earthen banks work well. Sunny and south-facing are ideal, and soil-filled planters can even be helpful. So stay off the area so that you don't disturb those ground nesting bees. And this prairie drop seed, you can imagine these ground-dwelling bees being able to find vegetation-free areas underneath those stalks, underneath those spilling blades of grass. Now, the mason bee is not a ground-dwelling bee. It's a cavity nesting, and it's called a mason bee because once that bee visits a flower on an apple tree, for example, it's more likely to fly to a different tree carrying that load of pollen, while a honeybee is much more likely just to stay on that tree and go from flower to flower to flower on that same tree, which is not advantageous for the tree at all. So blue orchids are much more efficient pollinators of orchard trees, blue orchid mason bees. And mason bees use mud to partition their chambers. And leafcutter bees use leaf blades to do the same thing. So you'll see this remarkable insect is able to cut perfect circles out of leaf blades and then roll them up and then insert them into the cavity where she will lay her eggs. Crops pollinated by leafcutter bees include blueberry, onion, carrot, and alfalfa. And I proudly discovered last year in my pollinator garden, I was growing tick trefoil, and I found some leaves that had the telltale circles cut out of them. And before that, I'd only seen pictures of this phenomenon. So it was so great to know that I was providing habitat for this kind of bee. The flower in the lower right is a rose, are rose leaves. Growers of rose bushes need not fear, however, because those bushes will still be healthy even if a few bites are taken out of them. So this block of wood had 3 holes drilled in it, and the leafcutter bee took up residence, or I should say used one hole, the top hole, there for its cocoons wrapped in the leaf blades. So there you see about half dozen of them in this photo. Rosin bee, there's several, must be about a dozen at least chambers with the rosin bee larvae, and then the cocoons of the mason bee on the lower row there, partitioned with mud. Now, we can offer bee hotels with stalks that are hollow, different types of plants, and that Japanese knotweed that we met earlier as one of the invasive plants. Because it's so common, might as well use it. The dead stalks from last year's growth are ideal in finding sections that are closed at one end and open at the other, anywhere from 3/32 of an inch wide to 3/8 inch wide. And they should be 3 to 6 inches deep, depending on how wide those openings are. And notice also in this slide, in the center, you'll see someone rolling a piece of paper on it around a dowel, or a pencil could also be used. The point of that is to insert those into the stalks of the bee hotel, so that when at the end of the season they can be removed, and the diseased mason bee cocoons would be eliminated. The healthy cocoons would be saved and put in the refrigerator and kept safe in that way until the spring, when everything's warmed up and it's safe to release them. Now I'd like to share some flowers some perennials that are bee magnets for native bees in particular. And a study was done to find out which plants attracted the most native bee genera. And at first place was wild bergamot, attracting 15 different genera of native bees. A genera is plural for genus. So that means that there's a lot more than 15 species of native bees. And of course, butterflies and other insects as well, visiting wild bergamot, a beautiful plant, a close relative of the plant called bee balm, which you might be familiar with, which has red flowers and is shaped quite similarly, and is also a valuable pollinator plant. So wild bergamot is at first place with 15, and 14 black-eyed Susan in second place, 13 genera boneset. And then tied for fourth place, we have swamp milkweed, butterfly weed, tickseed, oxeye sunflower, mountain mint, and blue vervain. And I'd like to say something about mountain mint here, one of my favorite pollinator plants. It's like a lesson in entomology when you watch a patch of mountain mint. There's so many different insects that come visiting for a stretch of many weeks when the flowers are being produced, attractive to many wasps, including this great black wasp, which incidentally is totally harmless, and the beneficial tachinid fly you see up in the upper left, and the bumblebee, and so many others. Interesting fact is that if you crush the leaves of mountain mint and apply it to your skin, it's an effective mosquito repellent for at least a half hour. And while this is a mint and it will spread because you want it to spread, but it's not that difficult to manage if you want to limit its spread. So more valuable plants for native bees: the foxglove, beard tongue, cup plant, New England aster, and golden alexanders. And the beard tongue and golden alexanders are the two that are blooming in the spring, while New England aster would bloom in the fall. Another spring blooming plant is the wild geranium. Again, the big leaf aster would be a fall blooming. And then anise hyssop, fantastic plant for pollinators, also a purple coneflower. Jacob's ladder, Ohio spiderwort. Ironweed is a very tall and handsome perennial, herbaceous perennial. Culver's root can grow in the shade. Now, when we look at purple coneflower and consider it in our gardens, please use the straight or original species, not any of the cultivars. The reason for this is that I guess there are about 100 different cultivars of purple coneflower that have been produced in the trade. However, they're not in general as useful to pollinators. Pollinators can barely see the green jewel because they see different colors than we see. Magnus doesn't have any pollen or nectar to speak of, and even double delight, which resembles the original species purple coneflower, has much less pollen and nectar to offer. And then harebell, wild lupin, and bloodroot are also among these plants that attract at least 7 native bee genera. Plants that are relatively useless or much less useful to pollinators are the pansy, daylilies, hybrid tea rose, double marigold, petunia, New Guinea impatiens, begonia, peony, and forsythia. So instead, we're better off with the native plants that are providing those pollinator services for the pollinators. So the invertebrate predators and parasites that are beneficial include spiders, which are generalists, and praying mantises likewise will catch and eat anything they can find. We think of praying mantises as being valuable in terms of pest control, but really it's the insects that focus their efforts on the pests themselves, such as lacewings. It's the larvae that are ravenously eating the mealybug, spider mites, thrips, aphids, and caterpillars. And as adults, lacewings are pollinators. You can offer a lacewing hotel by rolling a piece of cardboard and inserting it inside a plastic bottle with the bottom cut off and hanging that in a tree. The ladybug larvae, ladybugs are actually beetles. So the ladybug beetle larva is a good predator of aphids, mites, and mealybugs. Notice the delightful diversity of species of ladybug beetles. And it's the adults, again, that are pollinators. Some pine cones inside a mesh bag can be a ladybug hotel. Fireflies are beneficials. They prey on insect larvae, snails, and slugs. They are much less common than they used to be. Low-hanging trees, forest litter, long grasses, ponds, and streams are good for them. No fertilizers or no synthetic fertilizers or pesticides. And also, please turn off your outdoor lights because they are confusing to these fireflies that are trying to use their lights for mating. And here's another kind of, these assassin bugs are efficient predators, as are the hoverfly or syrphid fly. The larva of the hoverfly or syrphid fly is great at limiting aphid populations. And once again, it's the adult that is a pollinator. Now, a parasite, this wasp is remarkable because it's so small, and yet it's able to lay its eggs in the eggs of much larger insects and control their populations. And they're bracketed wasps, and an unbelievable diversity. So many different species of this wasp are out that are specializing on different insects. And that's quite a long list of pests that they are able to control populations of. So the adult parasites and predators are pollinators, and they are attracted to these plants such as Queen Anne's lace, dill, and fennel in the Apiaceae family, and the aster family that I mentioned earlier, Asteraceae, the goldenrod, tansy, marigold, dandelion, boneset, yarrow, coreopsis, aster. These are all valuable members of that aster family for insects and for birds, for that matter. And then these mints, the horse mint, particularly good for wasps. Bugleweed, a flower that's commonly found in your garden, in your lawn rather. There's the wild bergamot again, and the anisyssip. So if you're a farmer, you know about IPM, integrated pest management. It's you can call it intelligent pest management, because why would anyone want to poison the insects that are helping us with these toxic chemicals that are systemic? So other alternative means of control include barriers such as floating row covers, which keep those pests out. Companion plants, which can sometimes repel those pests. Hand picking can sometimes be a feasible way of controlling them, and also using organic pesticides is preferable to the synthetic chemicals. Now, we often think of herbaceous plants as being pollinator plants, but trees and shrubs have far more flowers than herbaceous plants do, and for that reason are very valuable, such as this willow. Perhaps you could say different willow species are one of the most valuable plants out there. In the spring, they're offering the pollen and nectar for a wide variety of different kinds of insects. Chinese witch hazel in the spring and common witch hazel in the fall are good for pollinators. And so is the redbud tree, any of the fruit trees, including the native tree, American plum, and the native shrub, beech plum. Insects are just swarming over these plants when those flowers are out. Black cherry and choke cherry, Virginia rose, Carolina rose. Rosa rugosa is a non-native, but it's a great pollinator plant. Juneberry, the native tree that is so popular with birds. It's also a great pollinator plant. Maples and oaks do not have conspicuous flowers, but they do have pollen and nectar for pollinators. Basswood is a great tree for honeybees. Blueberry flowers, and also the red osier dogwood. Common ninebark, again, use the straight species, not the kind with the purple colored leaves, which is not edible to the ninebark leaf beetle. Winterberry holly, again, both for birds and insects. Staghorn sumac, look at those honeybees swarming over the inflorescence of the staghorn sumac. Viburnums are pollinator plants, and so are the native hydrangeas. And this shrub that grows in the shade, mountain laurel, attracts so many of the butterflies that visit it. So spring ephemerals have the strategy of coming out before trees and shrubs are leafing out in the spring. So they are a valuable source of nectar before those flowers are available. Crocuses, for example, grape hyacinth, Siberian squill, wild bleeding heart, which blooms again in the fall, another a native species, bloodroot. And annuals for pollinators include sunflower, of course, Mexican sunflower we've mentioned, also zinnia, and spider flower, ageratum, sweet alyssum, borage, pineapple sage, and cosmos are all attractive as annuals. And consider that if you're growing culinary herbs, if you let them blossom, another resource for pollinators, basil, chives, rosemary, oregano, and lavender and catmint. Kathy Neal has offered this flowering calendar for native pollinator plants. You'll see that she indicates for each plant what the color of the bloom is and how long it is blooming. And a rule of thumb says that you should have at least 3 flowers in spring that are blooming, 3 plants that are blooming in the summer, and 3 in the late summer and fall, for a total of 9 species. That would be a bare minimum pollinator garden. And you'd want at least 3 to 5 individuals of each species so that they can be cross-pollinating, and so you have an adequate supply of that kind of flower. And the same website that I referred to you to for the wildflower meadows, extension.unh.edu, if you indicate pollinator plants for northern New England, you'll find this list. And I'll also be sending it to you, and you'll receive it in your email tomorrow morning. So buying seeds is the cheapest way to get plants and just sprout them yourself. But many seeds will not germinate unless they first have experienced winter. In other words, a prolonged period of cold and damp conditions. And refrigerators offer the ideal temperature. 34 to 41 degrees is required for breaking dormancy. And you can put seeds in plastic bags with moistened vermiculite or sand or moist paper towels. Wild Seed Project is a great website to learn about seed starting, and also you can buy seeds from that organization, Wild Seed Project. Growing wildflowers from seed, once you've scattered them and you're watching them grow, it can be alarming sometimes to see how many you have. And actually, it doesn't. It can be. They seem to like company at this stage, but eventually you are going to want to separate them into separate containers, and these are called plugs. When each root system has its own separate supply of soil, potting soil, and it's important to have appropriate potting soil mix. You can again go to wildseedproject.org or other websites to learn about different alternatives for starting seeds. And you'll have a lot of plants for not very much money, and you'll be assured that each plant is genetically distinct. They won't be clones of each other, which sometimes happens when you buy plants at the nursery. But cloning is sometimes just the right thing to increase the quantity of plants in your property. So in this case, this is a swamp milkweed, and I knew that if I uprooted those clump that I had with 4 stalks, I'd be able to separate those clumps, that clump with clippers, and each one would have its own supply of roots, and then spread them out in my landscape. Vegetative propagation can also be accomplished by layering, which is simply burying the stem in soil and inducing it to root that way, and then severing it from the parent plant. Cuttings are another approach. And if you remove the lower leaves after slicing off part of the stem before placing it in the pot, that's the good tactic. So native plant nurseries, quite a number of them out there in Massachusetts, and then New England native plant seeds. This is also part of the resource that I'll offer. And consider these establishments as not only resources of plants and seeds, but also of information. You can contact them and ask them what they would recommend if you have challenging conditions, microhabitats on your property, such as shady, or maybe you have extremes of pH, acidic or basic. Maybe you have wet or dry soils, or clayey or sandy. And they have so much experience, they'll be able to guide you in the right direction and suggest some plants that will do well in those areas. The master gardeners are available to give you either an ID of a plant if you send them a plant photo, or perhaps they'll help figure out why your plant is not healthy, and offering suggestions on how to help it out. This is the Tower Hill Hortline. Consider joining a garden club. You'll be able to learn a lot about plants and meet a lot of people, and most likely you'll be able to acquire a lot of plants, trading with each other, or just befriend other gardeners in your neighborhood. And you can share the produce, share the plants. You can even share your labor in the spirit of barn raising, collaborate on projects, and learn from each other. So invite children to be steward of nature, because it's so great for them to have the sense of accomplishment and pride and self-confidence in being able to grow plants. And if they're growing produce, then they'll discover what real food really tastes like. And we can be growing the next generation of environmental stewards when we help children to learn about nature and help to grow plants of all kinds. All decisions must maximize the welfare of the unborn unto the 7th generation. This is the great binding law of the Iroquois Confederation, which is important for us to realize that our descendants, whom we will never meet, and also the animals and plants that are counting on us to do the right thing so that the planet will be inhabitable for future generations. There is no limit to what we can do together. Start where you are. And thank you for doing your part. So here's my email address, info@johnroot.net. And Robert, I'm wondering if there are any questions in the chat.
Yes, John. So we have about a handful of questions. I would encourage folks, get your questions into the Q&A. We'll get to them right away. I did just want to note, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, that a patron who I believe is on the call, Polly Flanagan, recently donated 50 packets of milkweed seeds to the library. And we're going to put these outside the library's main entrance on Monday from 10 to 8 o'clock. We get about 50 packets. And I would encourage any of you to come on down and grab one. This is from an organization called Save Our Monarchs Foundation, saveourmonarchs.org/donate. It takes 3 to 4 weeks to germinate and 60 days until it's full grown. And I guess there's a couple of different types of milkweed. And so these packets will be outside the library's main entrance from 10 to 8 on Monday. And I'll provide that information in the email I send tomorrow.
Robert, can you read on that package? Is that the Asclepias syriaca, the common milkweed?
Yes.
Okay, and that is the kind of the plant that I advise you not to grow in your gardens, because it will take over your garden. So if you want to plant common milkweed, it's good to have put them in where they can have their own garden.
So it's hopefully it's Asclepias tuberosa.
Oh, tuberosa, that's great. Oh, that's yeah, that is.
Are those the good ones, John?
Tuberosa is the butterfly weed with the orange flowers. That's an ideal plant to grow in your garden. That's an ideal.
These are the okay ones. Sorry about that. I don't know my Latin. All right. So also just wanted to note, we had a couple of Tewksbury Garden Club members, Tewksbury Garden Club members on the call. And Charlene says that the garden club here in Tewksbury is welcoming new members.
Great.
We also have a comment. Thanks for the great presentation and precious information to help our many members of our great family. And Cynthia says, what cool facts. All right. So Q&A. We'll try to run through these so Robert can get home in time for the Patriots draft pick. Rich wants to know, on warm spring days, why do ladybugs appear on windowsills and areas around my home?
I don't know.
There we go. Rich, follow-up question. And you touched on this a little bit, best advice to attract butterflies?
Well, a butterfly garden has, I mentioned, you want a place that has a lot of sun and just a lot of diversity of native plants. That's the key. You can visit, I mentioned naba.org. They have a list of those good plants to use. It's all about plants. It's all about establishing, and of course, don't forget about the host plants that you need. So you're not just providing nectar for the adult butterflies, you also need to feed those caterpillars so that you can have the adults. So that's why it's really important to think in terms of trees and shrubs as well as herbaceous perennials, because that's where the caterpillars will be feeding in many cases. But diversity and quantity are both key. In the number of different species and just and the quantity of plants that you have, the more the better.
Julie says, great presentation. I learned so much. I didn't know you could do emojis on Zoom. There you go, Julie. Rich says, thank you, John. So another Julie asks, I would like to replace 2 large bushes on the north side of my home with something beneficial for birds. It's a 6 to 7 strip along the house. Any suggestions?
Sure. Go online and search for shrubs, native shrubs, New England. Now, I believe that UMass has provided a helpful list. I mean, there's so many choices, right? So I would hesitate to say this or that or the other. I'm not sure whether what you the place you have has plenty of sun or if it's fairly shady. And also, people have. I think it's good to give some consideration to all the variety of shrubs that are available. So rather than just name, these are the ones that I would go with. They're all good if they're native shrubs, and there's a wealth of variety to choose from.
Great. Polly, who, as I mentioned, is the milkweed donor here. She says, I just read that people are using honey instead of white sugar in their mix for hummingbirds, and that it's very bad for them.
You're right. It's bad. Yeah, it's bad. Yeah.
All right. And then my old pal Cheryl, who I miss and I hope to see in person soon. Cheryl says, are lupine okay for bees? I've heard that they are dangerous for bees.
I have not heard that. That's an odd thing. I don't know why they'd be dangerous.
All right, excellent. Let's see. Bonnie says, thank you so much. Wonderful program. I don't see any additional comments or questions. And we are coming up on 8:40. So John, wonderful presentation. I think you showed us about 200 slides. You packed a lot of information in 90 minutes. Do you have any last words for the audience before we wrap up for the night?
Just thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's so important that we all are part of the solution.
Cheryl says, thank you. Great webinar. So want to thank John, want to thank the Tewksbury Cultural Council and the Massachusetts Cultural Council for the grant to fund tonight's program. Also want to thank the Tewksbury Garden Club for helping promote the program. Charlene says, thank you. A lot of great information. I agree, Charlene. All right, so we'll wrap it there. For those who registered and are on live, look for an email tomorrow morning, link to a feedback survey, John's handouts, information about the milkweed giveaway on Monday, and I'll also include the recording from tonight, and also Doug Tallamy's recording from Tuesday, which was excellent. as was tonight's. So thank you all so much. Everyone have a good one, and let's cross our fingers for the New England Patriots tonight. Have a good one, John. Thanks so much.